You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts on strategic communication with the EU's neighbours.
Strategic communication is not a new concept, but its significance for the EU's foreign and security policy is increasing, particularly following the propaganda and disinformation practices in relation to the Ukraine conflict and recruitment practices by jihadi groups.
So the European Union is designing a more strategic vision for engaging with stakeholders in its neighbourhood. We'll tell you all about it in this podcast.
Let's look first at what is happening in Europe's south. If we visualise the history of the EU's relations with the Arab world on a piece of paper, we wouldn't see a straight line, but a roller coaster.
After the high moment created by the Barcelona process in 1995, the military interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then the terrorist attacks in London and Madrid strained relations between the West and the Arab world.
Relations picked up again following the wave of public support for the Arab Spring, but the conflicts in Libya and Syria and the ensuing refugee crisis have once again curved the line.
More recently, the terrorist attacks in Paris and Brussels and the spreading of a jihadi propaganda exercised by terrorist groups like ISIL, Daesh and Al-Qaeda signals a clear need to rethink the way in which the EU communicates, not only with the Arab countries, but also with its own citizens. To date, over 30,000 foreigners have joined the ranks of Daesh, including about 4,000 European citizens. So what can the EU do?
Well, it's all about strategic communication. The EU's Action Plan on Strategic Communication recognises the need to better promote EU policies and values, to strengthen the role of the media and civil society, and to make citizens aware of potential disinformation activities.
One of the main objectives of this new strategic communication with the Arab world is to improve relations and mutual perceptions between the two.
Despite the €9 billion invested by the EU under the European Neighbourhood Instrument until 2020 and the additional €8 billion to help relieve Syrians in their country and refugees in host countries, Europe's southern neighbours are only vaguely aware of European efforts.
And because of the internet, the EU's somewhat controversial stance on migration and the international criticism over its narrow focus on the economic implications of the refugee crisis have further deteriorated the EU's image in the Arab world.
Jihadi groups have been quick to use the situation to their advantage. Using words such as holy war, crusaders and martyrs, they tempt potential new recruits with the vision of turning them into heroes. In their view, cities like Paris and Brussels are battlegrounds between two opposing camps.
Daesh also attempts to discredit Western imams and former radicalised individuals who expose Daesh lies and work closely with local communities, police and prosecutors.
So how is the EU responding to these hate narratives? Let's take a look.
Most importantly, the EU is trying to address the root causes leading to radicalisation, such as social and political exclusion or inequalities, both outside of the EU borders in countries like Iraq and Nigeria, and in Europe.
The EU's approach focuses on three main pillars: spreading information about EU support to Arab countries, countering messages that might contribute to radicalisation and terrorism, and curbing channels for ISIL Daesh propaganda.
In February 2015, EU foreign affairs ministers laid down the building blocks for a new structure, known as Arab Stratcom Task Force, that is responsible for outreach and communication in the Arab world.
A detailed roadmap for cooperation with Arab countries includes, among others, strengthening cooperation with third countries, capacity building, and initiatives aimed at countering radicalisation and violent extremism.
Relying strongly on the support and know-how of EU delegations in Arab countries, the current focus of the Arab Stratcom is on letting locals know what the EU is doing for their country, but also on trying to better understand their perceptions and views of the European Union.
The second pillar of EU action is countering violent extremism. Hours of discussions between member states, EU institutions and experts in this field have been reflected in the EU strategy for combating radicalisation and recruitment and in the EU agenda on security.
Since radicalisation doesn't respect borders, in 2011 the European Commission established the Radicalisation Awareness Network, which brings together more than 700 experts and practitioners from across Europe to find the most effective ways to counter extremist propaganda and challenge their ideas.
The EU is also financing the Syria Strategic Communication Advisory Team, an intergovernmental body based in Belgium that aims, amongst other things, at finding solutions to prevent the recruitment of young Europeans by terrorist groups.
The third line of action concerns cyberspace. Today, the internet offers the best and the worst at the same time. For young people tempted by jihad, finding information on how to make a bomb or watching the latest terrorist propaganda video is only one click away.
So how is the international community responding to this new form of cyber jihadism?
Well, mainly through strengthening police cooperation and cutting their financial lifelines that are used to fund terrorist propaganda and recruitment online.
And is there a role for the European Parliament to play when it comes to strategic communication? Let's take a look.
The European Parliament has been very vocal on issues such as relations with the Arab world, counter-terrorism, radicalisation and intercultural dialogue. And it has repeatedly stressed the importance of maintaining good relations with the Arab world.
In a 2015 resolution on the review of the European Neighbourhood Policy, it stressed the need to support democracy, the rule of law and human rights in relations with neighbouring countries.
In the same year, MEPs adopted 2 more resolutions on anti-terrorism measures and on preventing radicalisation, with detailed proposals on strategic communication.
MEPs have also focused on the security challenges in the Middle East and North Africa, emphasising the importance of cultural and academic cooperation, as well as religious dialogue to combat radicalisation and terrorism. They have also highlighted the role of intercultural dialogue in promoting EU fundamental values.
The ongoing wars and terrorist attacks in and around Europe have increased concern over the use of propaganda and disinformation as strategic communication tools. One of the best examples is Russia's information war in relation to the Ukrainian crisis.
The images of pro-Russian soldiers capturing TV towers in eastern Ukraine, cutting off Ukrainian broadcasts and replacing them with Russian TV channels confirmed what the Kremlin's chief propagandist Dmitry Kiselev once said: information wars have become the main type of warfare.
In 2015, the European Parliament strongly condemned Russia's propaganda and information war on Ukraine and stressed the importance of avoiding propaganda, hate speech and rhetoric which could further aggravate the conflict.
MEPs have also called for the EU to strengthen its capacity to counter misinformation and propaganda campaigns. So what has the EU done?
The EU has set up a strategic communication task force to develop a response and improve the EU's capacity to anticipate and respond to disinformation attacks. One of the first initiatives of this team was a weekly review exposing Russian disinformation.
The team's EU Mythbusters work together with international journalists, NGOs and think tanks to spot such attacks and make European citizens aware of the magnitude of the problem.
And while disinformation has become widely used in connection with Russia's actions in Ukraine, the European Council used the term in 2012 to describe some Syrian media outlets and justify its restrictive measures against Syria.
From the beginning of Syria's war, the regime of Bashar al-Assad has run a very elaborate media campaign to portray itself as the victim of an international conspiracy to overthrow a defiant resistance state.
In fact, propaganda and disinformation have become so widespread that the European Union will need to remain vigilant and continue challenging dangerous narratives to ensure EU citizens can continue enjoying the freedom and peace they have become used to.
You're listening to the European Parliamentary Research Service podcasts.